here. Unless we help them do it, and then they get a lot of complaints from the people. I'll show you the photos I took. They were wonderful. Apparently they started knitting these things during lockdown, and now they're changing them every season.
Yeah, I remember seeing something on the news.
Yeah.
Post boxes.
Oh, that's right. Where is it? A few years ago, my friend Bradford on Avon knitted Christmas puddings to go on the top of them. I think it's a lovely idea.
If someone did it around the city, any city, the enough people complain that they would have to take them.
Well, welcome back, friends. I hope you had a good lunch and again the sun, because the sun is the next thing on the agenda, really. Because it's time to emerge from the chrysalis. And what happens when the new butterfly starts to emerge? And one of the lovely things that happens, if you've perhaps seen it, or if not, look at it on the internet, you can see as a chrysalis is almost at the point of emerging, or the butterfly is almost at the point of emerging, there's a kind of translucency to the shell of or the outer skin of the chrysalis, of the cocoon. And the colours of that particular butterfly start to show through. And there's something about it's then that it begins to show its true colours. Now, I think as a human family, we're quite away from any significant emergence into butterfly life. When you see what butterfly life asks of us and is what it's like, see how you feel. But there's something about recognising the true colours of each other. There's a song, True Colours. It was one of the songs my daughter and son-in-law had around at their wedding, not in the ceremony, but in the reception. Your true colours shining through. Those from the Christian tradition will maybe remember the story of Nathaniel sitting under a fig tree, minding his own business, and Jesus comes along with Philip, I think it was, and Philip is full of the news that he's found the Messiah, as he says, and runs over to Nathaniel. First of all, you get Jesus looking at Nathaniel, a complete stranger, sitting under a fig tree, and saying, without having any conversation with him, saying, "This is a true son of Israel, in whom there is no deceit." That's somebody recognising the true colours of the true person that other person is. But Nathaniel doesn't return the compliment because Philip runs over and says, "Found the Messiah," and Nathaniel says, "Oh yeah, where's he from?" From Nazareth. Yeah, he says, "When did anything good come out of Nazareth?" Now, I don't know whether that question, whatever good came out of Nazareth, ever crosses your radar, but how easy it is to say, or think at least, well, she's from such and such a place, or such and such a family, nothing good ever came out of that direction. You know, we tend to do that. So, but now and again, to think it's possible to see the true colours of a person. So, sometimes when they've been stricken with all kinds of problems, and the truth, what does that mean? Just throw out that question. What does it mean to see the true colours of ourselves and each other? And when we do see a glimpse of this is what really rings true. You know, you may have a friend or someone you meet, and there's something really authentic about them. You feel that you're getting what it says on the tin. They are what they present as. There's an integrity between who they are deep down in how they are in the wider world. And it's not that common, unfortunately, and it's almost unheard of in high places of leadership. But it isn't unheard of. It isn't unheard of. There are examples. But so anyway, just mention that whole thing about the true colours. But then there's a struggle. You're probably well familiar with the story of the little boy at school and the parents, the teachers had got a glass case. And some people can do that at home. You can do it at home, and you get your chrysalis and you watch it. It hangs there until it's ready to emerge. And this little boy was determined to see the butterfly come out of this chrysalis. So went into school very early every morning, and then started to see the miracle happening. And this delicate creature starts to emerge out of this, what was a horrible gooey mess, and now emerges out of it. But the emergent butterfly is all tangled up with the strands of the chrysalis. It's as if it's all knotted up, that it can't break out of this cage, as it were. And the little boy cuts the threads for it with a pair of scissors. And the butterfly dies. Not because he's cut the butterfly and hurt it, but because the butterfly needs that struggle, that birth struggle. Without that birth struggle, there won't be any circulation to the wings, and without being able to fly, the butterfly won't be able to get food and will die. So the importance of struggle in our lives, it's not something we want, but most babies come to birth with at least some degree of struggle. It's not an easy matter to come to birth. So the struggle is essential, and we mustn't try to shortcut it, even though it's very, very tempting to shortcut it. You see somebody in distress, not that you should just sit and watch them, but there's certain struggles in our lives, not all, but certain struggles in our lives are part of growing into the next stage of who we could become. And then, when the time is right, the time has to be right. I mentioned that before. It's not in our control when the birthing happens. And it's not really in control when a human baby is born, although there are some interventions that would indicate that we can sort of make it fit our time scale, but we can't, in fact. I can tell you as the mother of an obstetrician that she's called out day and night. Babies are no respecter of the hours. And I was in a place near Exeter last week where they keep lambs, they keep sheep, a rare breed of sheep. And one of the team there she's the lamb lady or the sheep lady. There are other duties. And I met her on Thursday morning, I think it was, wandering around and greeted her. And she said, "Margaret, I'm going to have a really early night tonight because it's last night the last lamb arrived. And for the first time for ages, I can sleep through a night without having to get up and go to the lambing shed." So we try to be alongside our animals as well when they're giving birth. But it has to be when the time is right, and if it's in the middle of the night, so be it. You can't change anything. Those who know about these things tell me that the final stage of human labour is preceded by a period, and I remember that period, which I didn't know it had a name. It's a period when you think that this baby is never going to get born. And if you have a long labour, it felt like that with my one and only child, my daughter. I remember saying to the midwife, "This is going to be the first baby in history that never gets born." And of course, she was. She was a mountain child as well. She was 4.25 kilos, which is no wonder it took so long. But in that moment, I think they call it the transition time, something like that. Maybe some of you know. You're near despair. It seems endless, the pain, the struggle, the blood, sweat and tears, and the waiting, and the impossibility of speeding it all up. But that time that seems so near to, can't do this isn't going to happen, is exactly the time preceding the coming to birth of something new. If that's the case generally in our lives as human beings on this planet, and we're in that kind of transition time now, there is hope, I believe, that something is indeed coming to birth. It's not just a hiding to nothing. I offer you that hope. And for me, it's an authentic hope. So when the butterfly actually emerges, what does it do next? Oh, you're going to love this, and we could go out and simply do it all the rest of the afternoon. The butterfly lies in the sun and dries its wings. Lets the wings dry out, soaks up the solar energy. And it's interesting to think that in all our activity and busyness, I'm going to sneeze, I'm sorry, it's the pollen, I assure you it's the pollen, I'm not got my computer, never mind. Forgive me if I do, I'll probably explode over the Zoom, but never mind. For all our busyness and activity, we forget that the energy we need is more likely to be found in stillness than in activity. And so the butterfly teaches us something simply by beginning a life, a new life, by lying in the sun and letting the energy soak in. So why not let us do that? This weekend would be a good opportunity to do some lying in the sun, soaking up an energy greater than our own. But then that is so kind of you. Thank you. I've got two hankies and they're all somewhere else. Thank you. That's very kind. So we'll explore what butterfly life is like. Because for me, it shows a lot about how life might be if we move to the next stage of our humanization process. What would it look like? What would characterize it? And let's see whether any of the butterfly characteristics help us to engage with what we might become, what tendencies might be, the things we will put on the arm, the things that matter most, the things that we want to keep alive and make live more. So there's various aspects of butterfly life that I commend you for your reflection. The first, not in any particular order, the first is what was in the forest with the caterpillars, grab and guzzle, eat all you can get kind of feeding pattern is quite different from the butterflies. Now with the butterfly, it's sip and savour. The butterflies also need their nourishment, and they get it from the certain flowers that have the nectar that they need. This isn't just true of butterflies, it's true of lots of insects, but they only take that nectar when it's on offer, as it were, in season. They don't force any flower open. They don't use any violence. They take what the flower is offering, and they have even the anatomy to get inside, down to the nectar, inside the bloom, and take the nectar that they desire and need. But it's a symbiotic relationship because both sides of the transaction are enriched by it. The flower is pollinated because the butterfly brings the pollen out on its body and takes it somewhere else to the next flower. So the flower gets what it needs, the pollination, and the butterfly gets what it needs, the nectar. A symbiotic relationship. This is a 180-degree change in our present human perception of things, the way we run our society, the way we run things generally. Certainly, between individuals and in our closer small circles, there is a lot of symbiotic relationship going on. But on the bigger scale, we are very, very, very much driven by competition. And so if I gain, somebody else loses. It's that kind of seesaw thing. I've always, to be honest, I've had issues with competition. I'm not a competitive person at all. And I was told off resoundingly when I'm the guide leader, when I was a girl guide. Well, not told off, but she took me aside because when I got to be a patrol leader, I was like that before, but when I had any kind of leadership role, it meant that anybody in that patrol was going to be affected. And I could see absolutely no point in running up and down the church hall playing battleships and lifeboats or whatever it was we played. And I'm not saying this is the right way to do it, but I personally see no point in team games because, goodness me, if 11 people all want a ball, why don't we just give them all one? But that would rather wreck them and they might do it if the train drivers don't do it. But competition, and we are so driven by competition, and we are, as human beings, competitive creatures, and I get that. You can't just wipe it out and say, don't compete anymore, cooperate. But we can gradually move more towards cooperation and gradually away from unnecessary competition. I don't know about yourselves, but it saddens me to watch things like MasterChef or Bake Off or whatever the things are. I don't watch many of them, but to see people inevitably being eliminated. These are people who are doing great stuff. Why would you eliminate them? Why would you fail them? However, one thing that helped me with this competition, cooperation business, I'll share with you. And I was staying with a family and doing something in Minnesota, and I stayed with a family in Minneapolis. And the husband of the family was a teacher in a very deprived area of the city. And he was teaching mid-teenagers, 14, 15-year-olds. And they absolutely didn't want to be in school, and they had no interest in anything. They were the low achievers, and he didn't know how to motivate them. But then he got wind of something that he'd heard of, that there was a competition being organised internationally for robotics. Now, these lads love robotics, yes. It really interests them with making robots, yeah. So he asked them, would they be interested in doing something like that? Yeah. So they had a robot club, a robotics club first, and then he told them about this competition. And he entered them for it, and he obviously knew more about it than he told them, but the competition had several prizes. And there was a prize for the best robot, as you would expect in a robotics competition. But there were 2 or 3 other prizes, and at least one of which was to be awarded to the team that had shown the most willingness to help another team if they came unstuck. And that really warmed my heart. It warmed this guy that was telling me about it, said it. And they were just as keen to do that. And he said at the time, they coined a new word, co-opetition. Let's be competitive in how cooperative we can be. How well can we cooperate? Given that we can't not be competitive, let's channel it into something fruitful like that. And I thought, yeah, it reminded me of, lots of things. There's a story about a school, an integrated school with children who had various physical and intellectual challenges, as well as those who apparently didn't, and obviously it's a spectrum, and that was fine to integrate them as far as possible in class. But when it came to sports day, there was something very unfair about children with physical challenges racing physically against children without physical challenges. So they had a special race for children who were in any way physically challenged. And first of all the other races were run, and they all got their little first, second and third flags for them. their achievement in those races, the other children, and the parents all clapped and the teachers clapped. And then came this special race, and the firing sign was, or the start sign was given, and they all set off running along the track. And then one of them fell over. And without any hesitation, every child in that race turned back and went to the child that had fallen over, helped pick them up, and they linked hands and they ran the whole course together, side by side, and they crossed the finishing line together. And they had a standing ovation because the parents and the teachers that day had seen something far more important than who was good enough to win the race. They'd seen a lesson what it means to be fully human, more fully human. And it's a very moving story, but you see it replicated. It happens in marathons, it happens in the Olympics. People give up their chance to win something important to them that they've been training for ages, if they think that the better thing to do as a human being is to help someone else. So, competition. We can't stop being competitive, some more than others, but we can learn to be far more cooperative. And so I often have thought that a symbiotic relationship means how often have we heard this? Get new trade deals. Where exactly these new trade deals are, apart from in the solid others, we have yet to discover, as we know. But it's always about, we get a trade deal that's good for us, but that's because it's a bit not so good for the other partner, because we're making a profit and they're not making as much profit. That's almost instinctive in business to get our advantage where mostly it's at the expense of someone else's disadvantage. It's an unbalanced transaction. In Butterfly Land, no transaction is valid unless it benefits both or all parties to the transaction. That would seem to me, and what's more, that resonates with the values that Jesus taught about caring for one another, loving one another, and not getting one over on each other. Jesus and perhaps other spiritual leaders of the time. And the next thing about butterflies is that they're up there, they're not down on the ground or on the branch. They see, you could say, they see the bigger picture. They fly over the forest and maybe even look down and see their caterpillar grandchildren still scrambling around, fighting for space, trying to expand, fighting off all enemies and so on. And you wonder what they would say to those grandchildren, grand butterflies, grand caterpillars, if they could. I almost think they would say, don't sweat the small stuff. Come on, there's a whole bigger thing to see here. The world is much bigger than you imagine. And what happens on your branch is not the whole story. And it's not about your branch at the expense of all the other branches, or you getting fatter at the expense of the things that you eat that no longer have a chance to get fatter. So, what the caterpillars, but they would also know that the caterpillars are a work in progress. And the caterpillars don't know that. They think they're coming to the end eventually. Down on the ground, there's a preoccupation with what I call caterpillar matters. It's a short-term view because they don't have a long-term perspective, because they're not up there. They can't see the forest. You can only see the leaves that they want to eat. And that preoccupation with caterpillar matters is so all around us and within us. And how much of our time and energy is spent worrying about caterpillar matters? And wouldn't it be great if somebody, somewhere, or something within us would remind us, come on, there's a bigger story here. And it's not just about you and your short-term struggle for food, for space, for safety. You're missing the whole story if you only live in the first chapter of it. But to get to the next chapter, you might have to break up your mindset or your set mind. So, what does that mean for us? Where is the bigger picture? How do we engage with the bigger picture? Well, my suggestion is that global policy must rise above the parochial interest. And at the moment, there's really no sign. In fact, it seems to be getting worse. We hear the me first attitude all the time. Make me great again. Or you can hear when the echoes are coming from. We've heard it. We've heard it in Britain. We've heard it in the US, and less raucously in other countries as well. It's all about putting me on the map, my tribe, my country on the map, and sweeping up as much as we can in terms of profit and whatever else we're after, to make our bit bigger and better than the next bit. That is what I would call a parochial way of looking at things. My little bit is more important than the bigger picture, and that has to change. And it's not going to change overnight. It's an evolutionary process, I'm sure. But just looking at the big issues that affect all of us, and we've been forced to look at the big pictures that affect all of us. And that's perhaps one of the benefits of the various crises. Climate change affects us all. And it's not acceptable to simply say, well, we'll come through somehow. It's a shame about Australia burning up, and it's a shame about California being on fire. It's not so easy to push it aside when it'll be more that's on fire, for instance. It's coming closer and closer. It affects everybody, and it's incumbent on everybody to do whatever needs to be done or could be done to work against that. Another example would be vaccination being universal now, but this is not a statement about everybody must get vaccinated. What I mean is, when we saw how vaccines were developed, the rich countries certainly took the lion's share, regardless of a personal choice about whether or not to avail yourself of vaccination. That's another issue. But whether we share what we do have with the third world, it's still the case that large swathes of the world have still not got access to that kind of protection that we take for granted, and due another one anytime soon, myself. So that kind of thing, sharing our resources, needs to be much more universal. I remember once thinking, a long time ago, if we're really going to move on, this isn't going to involve a 10% reduction in our standard of living. It might take us to a reduction to 10% of our standard of living. That's a shocking thought, but it is creeping around now with the whole energy crisis, and what is it going to mean? How are we going to live in future? We can't necessarily ever go back to the standard we had. I don't want to depress everyone, but it's the bigger picture that this is one planet, and what affects one part of it, what one part of it does, affects all of it. One country's aggression, or one leader's aggression, can actually cause mass starvation by cutting off supply lines, by refusing to allow essential foodstuffs to be exported. That's a caterpillar thing. I'm going to do my thing, regardless of what it means to anybody else. So there are two kind of questions around here. The one that we tend to work with most at present, and that's what works best for me. I remember once when we were just building a house and we hadn't got round, it was in the 70s and 2 hot summers, I don't know if anybody remembers them, and it was far too hot to start messing about with the gardens, we just sat and sunned ourselves. And the neighbours let it be felt by body language that it was time we got our act together and got the garden sorted. And then the neighbours, it happened, went away for a weekend. The same weekend as we had a friend with a digger, and he came in and cleared the whole side and got it down to in levels that we could plant and sow grass seed and so on. And it was transformed when the neighbours came back, and we were still sitting sunning ourselves, but we'd had a busy weekend, and we heard the conversation behind the hedge. How does it affect us? And that's the question that we're always unconsciously, or sometimes consciously asking. How does this affect us? And if it doesn't affect us, we'll probably ignore it. How does it affect us? But the question that the butterfly world would ask is, how does this impact the greater good? And mostly it's true to say that what works, what most enhances the greater good, what serves the greater good, serves the well-being of everyone. That's not always true though, because some people actually surrender their freedom and their lives to serve the greater good. But in general, we are a body, and we are like cells in a body, so if one cell does its own thing and multiplies out of control, becomes cancerous, the whole body is affected. And what happens to the whole body affects every cell in it. So the question of how does this impact the greater good would be a butterfly question, as opposed to the what's best for me, which is the caterpillar question. That's all very simplified, of course, but just talk about it. Yeah, not too bad. Travel. They are great travellers, the butterflies. The monarch butterfly weighs probably less than a gram, or not much more than a gram, but can make a migratory round trip of 9,000 kilometres from Mexico to Canada and back. How does that work? For a start, the sheer wonder of this tiny creature flying that far, or flying anywhere, any distance. And it's true, a lot of migratory journeys, they are, you just think, open mouth, how do you do that? Well, we might well ask the question, how long does it take to fly from when you're a butterfly, from Mexico to Canada? And the answer, and how long does a butterfly live? And the answer to the question of how long it takes is, I think, 4 or 5 butterfly lifetimes. So they do it in phases, and they start off from there, and they have settling points, and they know where they are. They have that wisdom within them somehow, that whatever that knowledge is, they know where to go. And they start off, and they come to the first settling point, and they lay their eggs and die. And those eggs then have to hatch, go through the caterpillar stage, go through the chrysalis stage, and emerge as the next generation before the journey can continue. And that's what they do, 4 times over. So it's an intergenerational it's like a relay race. They hand on the baton to the next generation. And again, I think that's a huge lesson for us. Because there is a problem in our culture, certainly, with intergenerational injustice right now that didn't really exist when we were growing up. But when, a lot of us were born into a time when it was, without any question, we had access to cradle-to-grave health care, free at the point of need, and free to everyone. And we still have, but friends, guard it. It is in serious danger. I don't know how we guard it, but if we want to keep it, we must guard it. It's in real danger of being taken over by profit makers. We grew up in a time when we had free education from primary right through to tertiary. That's no longer the case. We grew up, I certainly left education into a fairly full jobs market. And it was relatively easy for my generation to work for a few years and have enough for a deposit on a house. We got onto the housing model. But we also, as we got older, became entitled by right, by having paid into NI contributions, to a state pension, which is, as long as you're not trying to pay rent from it or a mortgage, is sufficient to live on. There's no way that my grandchildren, the chances of them, or even my daughter, having a state pension that's worth very much when they retire, the chances of that are vanishingly small, unless they're going to save while they're working, substantially save while they're working. It's a whole different story. Getting old, the next generation is going to be. Getting old is, in any case, not for the faint-hearted, as some of you may have found out. But getting old for the next generation is going to be harder still, I suggest. So what do we need to do? We need to pass on the wisdom of the way as far as we possibly can. But having said that, they don't want to listen, I know. But passing on something of the way, the wisdom of the way to those who follow after us. And probably not by talking about it or telling them or making them read about it, but by living it ourselves, living in a wise way. And they'll see, hopefully, from some kind of example, that this might be the way to proceed. But also, and this is a challenge, being willing to hand on the baton to the next generation to fly the next stage of the journey. Not to fly our stage again using our rules and our mindset. If you do that on the way from Mexico to Canada, you'll never get beyond the first settling point. You'll just keep going over the same distance again. That's not what's asked of them. They have to fly unknown into a future that we can't predict. But we can give them all the support along the way that's possible. And there is a lot of people are supporting the next generation in a family sense, and friends and family. There's the bank of mum and dad, there's the babysitting agency of grandma and granddad, and there's the taxi service of mum and dad, and we all know those. But that's what you do, and sometimes it's quite extreme what you have to do, because they do get into a fix, and they really can't easily get out of it. So, travel. Passing on and thinking about the reasons why butterflies travel. Obviously, to find food, so they follow the wildflower trail. But there are also risks on the journey. There's some nasty wasps, for instance, that lay their eggs kind of inside the butterfly or the caterpillar and change the DNA. They actually really toxic things, the killer things. Toxic things that get inside them, things that get inside us, laying toxic eggs and potentially changing our values. So one of the things, there are two main reasons why they fly: to find food, to find a way of sustaining themselves, and to get away from present real dangers that they face. I ask us, how is that different from refugees now, who are coming desperately seeking a place of safety away from real and present mortal risks and the danger of death in conflict or in famine or whatever it may be. And also those who are actually looking for a better life, and we may think that's not a valid reason for landing on our overcrowded island, and I do understand it's not that simple. However, we should remember that in the past, and it's still going on, how many millions of Brits have emigrated to Australia, Canada, New Zealand and so on for no better reason than finding a better life. But certainly it's not acceptable the other way around. Now, admittedly, Australia's a bit bigger than Britain. So is the US, so is Canada. And I do know that you can't put a quart into a pint pot. Even so, it wouldn't hurt us to reflect on our attitudes towards those who are arriving on our shores, sometimes in very real danger and a very real risk. So, lots to learn from the butterflies, I suggest. And we'll pause for a time of reflection, I think. Yes, 2:30, that's right. But as we do so, or before we do so, a couple of stories that kind of illustrate what I've been sharing with you. One is a very silly story, but it made me laugh at the time. younger granddaughter who's now nearly 10, but she was about 3, I think, at the time of this incident. And she was writing a letter to Santa, helped with by mum, of course, her mum, my daughter. And at the top of her list, it was a fairly modest list. She's not a terribly demanding child, even though she thinks that parents don't have to pay for any of it. But at the top of the list, she had the most extraordinary request to Santa. She said she wanted a key. A key, K-E-Y, a key. And none of us knew what to make of it. What's this? A key. I want a key. Oh, right, you want a key? What kind of a key? You know, what? And she just kept saying, I want a key. That's what I want. I really want a key. And I taught her, I said, you know, it's, keys are usually, the reason for you want a key is to open something. I thought she was after some kind of box for a secret or something. So that if you can open something, what is it you want to open with your key? And she had it all packed, she'd worked it all out. She said, Mummy's car. And I said, Mummy's car. And basically the gist of it was, I'll never get the car, I don't need to ask. But actually all I need is the key. And I thought, interesting motivation there. But for us, we're not going to just put a wish up there into the sky and say we want all these things to be fixed. We can't have that, but we can have the key. The key, you could say metaphorically speaking, is that original cell within us that strives towards the more that invites us forward. So I'll tell you that story is sort of fairly light-hearted, but still. A more serious story, though, and this happened to me in a reflection time, over time, in retreat probably. And it was this. I found myself, I described it somewhere in books as well, so you may have come across it, but I was standing on the banks of a very fast-flowing river, and I knew I had to cross it. It was imperative to cross this river. But it was a very fast-flowing river. There was no way you could swim it or wade it, or there was no bridge across it. And as I stood there, pondering what to do about this figure came alongside me carrying this huge boulder and placed the boulder in front of me in the river and water and invited me to step on it and use it as a stepping stone. And I did that. And it was as if it was going over days. Obviously, it was a reflection, it only happened over an hour or so. And the next stage was the next morning, as it were. The same thing happened. And the boulder arrived, the person with the boulder. And then it carried on until I was in the middle of the river. I did say at the time, for me, as a Christian, it was a Christ-like figure that was bringing these boulders. So, I get to the middle of the river, and every morning another boulder arrives and another stepping stone. And then I'm halfway across the river, and one morning he doesn't come. And I was shocked. And I looked round, is he late today? What's happened? And that was what had happened. He was a bit late that day. But because he was late, I could see for the first time where the boulders were coming from. He was systematically deconstructing my little cottage on the riverbank to create the stepping stones to cross the river. And at that time, it was not just significant, it hit me between the eyes because I was standing at a very important transition in my life, an important decision which led to a major change in my life. And one of the ways to deal with that transition was to let go, to sell an actual cottage. And so you can imagine what that meant to me. But it has a bigger meaning because to move forward, we may have to let the past be deconstructed and reshaped into something new. The buildings that we cling to, that we so value, may have to be taken apart and be made into stepping stones. So it taught me, first of all, be willing to let the past be deconstructed and let it go. But it also taught me that the past isn't ever to be rubbished or said, oh, that, I wish I hadn't done that. The past is the place where the raw materials for the stepping stones are to be found. So our actual story, going right back, is all part of the story. None of it is to be set aside and diminished or discarded. But the past becomes the pathway to the future. But it's a painful deconstruction that goes on in between. So I'm going to leave it there for now and invite you to, it's 2:30ish now, 2:35. Let's take some more reflection time, this time a little bit longer, until 3. And invite you to just ponder, what does butterfly life mean to you? Do you see any signs of it starting to happen in our world? In your own personal world and in our national world and the global world? Where do you see the signs of hope? How can we encourage and nourish this coming to birth? And then we'll gather again at 3 o'clock. And I'd like to share with you something I call, and you have access to this when you get the handouts from the website. I call it a new constitution for a new consciousness. What might we want to bring to this new butterfly world, which Christians would call the coming of the kingdom? What would it mean to you? And then I'll read that to you reflectively, but then invite you to share. At this point, the recording will stop because we can't record individuals. It wouldn't be ethical and it wouldn't be technically possible. To bring to kind of open forum for about half an hour, anything that what are you taking away from this day? Where do you see us going in terms of the coming of the butterfly world in our world? So I'll leave it there for now, and I invite you to go to find your own reflection space, and see you again at 3. Thank you.